Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Smiles Lewis, and you are joining us for another monthly edition of the Anomaly Academy Cadet Lecture Series, part of the Anomaly Archives Patreon monthly event series. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your support, and we hope that you'll enjoy this presentation as much as I'm expecting us to. For those who aren't very familiar with us, of course, we are a 501c3 nonprofit based out of here in Austin, Texas. We are known as Anomaly Archives, aka the Scientific Anomaly Institute. You can, of course, find out more about us at our website, anomalyarchives.org. And of course, you can go to our website, our Patreon site. That's patreon.com/anomalyarchives, all one word. And of course, on the website, anomalyarchives.org, you can find out all about our preservation efforts and our public education efforts like this. And you can find information on the 7,000 plus titles that are in our collections, as well as the thousands of periodicals and paper files and digital files that are continuing to grow even as we speak. We launched in June of 2024 this monthly Anomaly Academy lecture series. And for those patrons of a certain tier or higher, you get access to this in the growing back catalog of such lectures. And we try to offer an interesting perspective every month. And this month is no different. Tonight's lecture is going to be presented by Aaron Gulyas, who received his BA in history from Hanover College in 1998. He returned to school and was awarded an MA in United States history from Indiana University, Indianapolis in 2003. He then moved into teaching, eventually landing at Mott Community College, where he has taught since 2006. Gulyas has presented numerous scholarly papers at conferences for various organizations, including the American Culture Association, the Popular Culture Association, and the Educational Technology Organization of Michigan. He's also presented at various UFO and paranormal conferences, such as the 50th Anniversary Festival commemorating the Shag Harbor UFO incident in Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia. That was back in 2017. He also participated in the Esotericon in 2018, featuring some of our good friends like Greg Bishop, Walter Bosley, Micah Hanks, and it was organized by a friend, Paul Kimball. And he's been at other conferences, including Strange Realities Conference. I think that was in 2023, and maybe multiples of those. He's contributed to numerous history, education, and popular cultural resources. Aaron was recognized and honored for the primary source collection he edited, Defining Documents in American History, Workers' Rights, which has been selected as one of the best historical materials published in 2023 and 24 by the Reference and User Services Association, an affiliate of the American Library Association. Congratulations. His first book, Extraterrestrials and the American Zeitgeist, Alien Contact Tales Since the 1950s, was published by McFarland in 2013. He's also contributed a chapter to Doctor Who in Time and Space, Essays on Themes, Characters, History, and Fandom, 1963 to 2012, about the ways in which fan expectations shaped the 1996 and 2005 revivals of the classic science fiction series. Since 2017, he has been producing one of my favorite podcasts, The Saucer Life, quote, which explores the history and lore of flying saucers, or UFOs if you like. No UAP here. Through the lens of individual stories of encounters, sightings, concepts, or events. Stories, quote unquote, is the key word. We're not interested in either proving or debunking anything. Rather, we're treating flying saucers as folklore. And I thoroughly enjoy that podcast. Every episode is a treasure trove of information on this subject I love so much. So without further ado, I want to, you know what? Just to embarrass him, he's also been on the game show Jeopardy. So there we go. Welcome our presenter, Aaron Gulyas. Thank you for joining us. Oh, wait, let me get your mic. Hold on. Sorry. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so just a word of warning. I'm getting over the flu that's been going around the Midwest. So if I have to cough a little bit, I apologize in advance. Still trying to get some of the gunk out of my lungs, but here and ready to talk about the Detroit Flying Saucer Club. Some of my favorite dead people. So
I did also want to mention for our viewers that they can in the comment section, they can post their questions. If they don't want them to appear on the screen, such as this, then they should type something like Anon, ANON beforehand. Otherwise, their name will likely appear. But so there we go. Well, with that, let's load up your slides and you take it away.
Okay. Well, um, this is a topic that I've spoken on before, and I just got done writing a chapter for an upcoming collection about this, the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, an organization that came into existence in the early 1950s and existed for a couple of years before fizzling out. But while it existed, it created a lot of interest in the subject in the Motor City here, including interest from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. Like Smiles said, I'm Aaron Gulyas. I do the Saucer Life podcast. I'm the author of Extraterrestrials in the American Zeitgeist, a couple books on conspiracy culture, a book on paranormal and conspiracy themed television series, and some more sort of straight history stuff. Like the introduction said, I'm really more interested in the stories and the folklore and the effects of these stories and the people who believe these stories and promulgate these stories. Way more interested in that than trying to figure out if the stories are real or not, or true or not. I think in many of these cases, determining truth or falsity is kind of a fool's errand in some ways. So I think that a sort of looking at the stories approach is the best way to go with some of the stuff. But the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, it may seem like a little sort of tiny parochial sort of thing, but in a lot of ways, it serves as a microcosm for a lot of things that were going on in the UFO flying saucer field in the 1950s. And as I look at this, one of the first questions that I feel needs to be addressed and that people usually have is, why do we look at Detroit? I mean, what's the deal with Detroit? I mean, it's popularity and reputation is on an upswing right now, but for pretty much my entire life, Detroit was not a city that anybody wanted to look at for anything, for any reasons that were good or happy, or fun. But in the 1950s, things were different as a result of the boom in the auto industry during the 1920s and the persistence of that industry even during the Great Depression of the 1930s, and then serving as sort of the heart of the arsenal of democracy during the 1940s and World War II. Detroit comes out of the Second World War into the late 40s and 1950s as a hugely influential city in the United States. In 1950, per capita, Detroit was the wealthiest major city in the United States. And probably because of the plethora of highly paid auto company executives who lived there, kind of bumping that average up, but also the relatively high wages of unionized and professional industrial workers, engineers, and things like that meant that Detroit was a city with an educated, large population. And that education is important as well. There are many people in Detroit, people who would be involved in the flying saucer scene in Detroit, who are not just sitting around looking at newspaper stories about flying saucers. They are engineers and they are executives and they are relatively important people in their fields. And these are the people who were interested in getting the flying saucer question examined by a larger number of people. There was also a great deal of public interest in Detroit during this time. And it's kind of a chicken and the egg question that I haven't quite figured out where I land on yet. Did the Detroit Flying Saucer Club's activities help generate this public interest, or was the interest there and they simply capitalized on it? I think it's the second, and I've got a couple of statistics that we'll see that might demonstrate that a bit. And finally, as a historian, as somebody who's looking at the past and wanting to find information and evidence about the past, the best thing for me about the Detroit Flying Saucer Club is that the Detroit Flying Saucer Club was the subject of a large number of available primary sources, ranging from memoirs of people who were involved in the creation of the club, to newspaper advertisements and stories, to digitally archived newsletters and magazines that they produced, to FBI files that are obtainable through a Freedom of Information Act request. There's a lot of information about the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, a lot of the writings of the people who were involved, and writings about them by others who were a little concerned about what they might be doing and what they might be up to. So there's a lot of things going for the Detroit Flying Saucer Club as far as not just being an interesting and significant player in the early flying saucer scene, but also one where we've got sort of a massive amount of information, especially compared to a lot of small local flying saucer clubs at the time. So, how did this whole club get started? Well, it gets started in 1954 out of a desire to promote contactee lectures in the Motor City in Detroit. And the prime mover behind this was a guy named Henry Madday. And Henry Madday was in his, I believe, his late 30s in the 1950s, and he was an editor for one of the big city directories that existed. This confused the heck out of me when I first learned this, because I had no idea what a city directory was. I was like, is it a phone book? Or not really a phone book, although it did have phone numbers. Basically, it went down and listed all the professional people in the city and their businesses and how you could get a hold of them and what their business was. It was like a promotional tool for businesses. And Henry Madday worked for a company that produced these city directories in Detroit. He was also the person who ran an organization called the Detroit Truth Forum. I almost forgot the name of it. The Detroit Truth Forum. And throughout the late 1940s and into the 1950s, the Detroit Truth Forum, which I'm pretty sure was just Henry Madday, presented a wide variety of lectures and presentations in Detroit about different topics, usually psychological, spiritual, some usually associated with new thought and that kind of field. I've got an ad here from I think 1950, whatever year it was a leap year because it was February 29th, but I think it's 1950. David Seabury and Dorcas Palmer, two noted psychologists, speaking on Can Men and Women Understand Each Other, followed by audience participation. I actually think that would be a pretty interesting topic, but presented at the Masonic Temple in Detroit, which is a huge venue. So in 1954, Henry Madday is having a party at his house. And among the people there are this couple here on the left, Bryant and Helen Reeve. Bryant Reeve had just retired from an automotive company where he was an engineer. and he and his wife were interested in religious and spiritual topics. And they come to this party, and they would write about this in a book later, a book called Flying Saucer Pilgrimage. They go to this party, and Henry is extremely excited because he's got a new book that he's found. It's called Flying Saucers Have Landed by George Adamski and Desmond Leslie. Now, as you might know, this was the first UFO flying saucer contactee book. Adamski asserted, claimed that he had a personal physical contact with a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy in a silver jumpsuit out near Desert Center, California. And he's been receiving messages and communication from these people, and he had a message of cosmic hope and love for everybody. And Henry was just taken away by this, and so were Bryant and Helen once they heard about it. And at this party, just a little house party in Detroit, Henry Madej gets on the phone, gets on to the operator, and wants to be connected to George Adamski in California so he can invite him out to Detroit to tell his story to him and his friends and whoever else will be there. Well, apparently Adamski did not have a phone at the time, so it took a couple days to get a hold of him. But Madej did, and brought Adamski to Detroit to speak to a small group at the Detroit Institute of Arts, one of their auditoriums there. By this time, this group of flying saucer promoters included another woman, Laura Mundo Marxer, also mostly known as Laura Mundo. She was Laura Marxer at the time. She would have a very close relationship, very close and very strange relationship with George Adamski, but she would become involved in this organization as well. Now, in March of 1954, Madej and his group brought Adamski back for a return trip in Detroit to speak at the Masonic Temple Auditorium. Flying saucers, learn about them from an eyewitness. You can get your tickets at any of these places, these bookstores, $1.50 plus tax, which in 1954 was probably $20 or so. So not cheap. But in his book, Flying Saucer Pilgrimage, one of the amusing things about it is Bryant Reeve, the retired engineer, talks about how basically his wife Helen volunteered them to front the money, thousands and thousands of dollars, to rent the auditorium and bring Adamski out to Detroit. So it was kind of a question in their mind how successful this would be, but it was very successful. This is a picture of part of the crowd from that March 1954 presentation. There were 4,000 people who came to see George Adamski at the Masonic Temple. It was front page news in the Detroit Free Press. There were stories, not just advertisements, but stories in the days leading up to the talk. And then there was sort of a report on the talk after the fact, interviewing Adamski, interviewing Henry Madej, interviewing some of the people who had seen Adamski. It was a big deal. And when I sort of started off here, I talked about this idea that it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing about was there a demand for flying saucer, I hate that I'm using this word, content amongst the people of Detroit before the Flying Saucer Club started bringing these speakers. And I think 4,000 people for the first major engagement they had, that it indicates to me that there was some kind of pent-up demand or interest in seeing this. So this was, by any measure, numbers, dollars, press coverage, what have you, this was a success. And so the Flying Saucer Club, Detroit Flying Saucer Club, as it was starting to become known, it kind of takes, so it's later in 1954 that they give themselves the official name, they keep going, and they start promoting more speakers. They brought Adamski back in September to the Detroit Institute of Arts. That was another $150 sort of thing. That one, I believe it was a sellout as well, but it was a smaller venue than the Masonic Temple. They also bring in Truman Bethram. Truman Bethram, with opening act John Otto, another flying saucer guy. This was later in 1954. Truman Bethram was another contactee. His book came out after Adamski's, but in true UFO contactee fashion, he claimed that his sightings actually took place before Adamski's. He just wrote the book later. Truman Bethram is the fellow who met the lady space captain, Aura Raines. So if you've heard of Aura Raines, this is that guy. Again, Masonic Temple, big venue. Another success as far as what the members of the club wrote about it later, but not nearly as much press coverage. And I will say that first sort of 4,000 person appearance by Adamski, that as far as press coverage goes, that dwarfed anything that would later happen. They also bring in George Hunt Williamson, anthropologist and contactee. He received messages through automatic writing, which is pretty interesting. Williamson, controversial figure because of some anomalies with regard to his academic record, but you'll notice a pattern. Williamson, Bethram, Adamski, the speakers they're bringing in are very much in the contactee side of things. Now, I will say that they attempted to bring in NICAP's Major Donald Kehoe around this same time, but that fell through, and they didn't explain why in their newsletter, but that appearance fell through pretty much at the last minute. So just because all the press coverage was around contactees, we should not discount the fact that they were bringing more mainstream UFO speakers, bringing those folks in as well. Desmond Leslie, George Adamski's co-author on Flying Saucers Have Landed, was brought in to the Detroit Institute of Arts to speak. If you've read Flying Saucers Have Landed, you'll know that Desmond Leslie basically wrote the non-contactee part that was sort of a historical survey of things in history that, looking back on them now, might kind of be grandfathered into the concept of flying saucers. Ezekiel's wheel and strange things in the background of medieval and Renaissance paintings, things like that. But as I've said, there's very much a heavy kind of contactee presence here with this. And they also did movie screenings. And this was in 1954, early 1954, a flying saucer motion picture, first documentary film ever produced, an actual saucer and fireball in flight, verified by Army, Navy, air pilots, and radar. Full length in color and sound. As far as I can tell, they never actually mentioned what the name of this documentary was, and I've been trying to figure it out. I know there's some sort of documentary shorts and some longer ones from the early to mid 50s, but those that I've seen are all in black and white and not color. So I'm interested to figure out what this is. If anybody knows, please let me know. So they will be bringing in speakers For a very long time, constantly. That's most of what they do. That's their big draw, but that's not the only thing they're doing. Near the end of 1954, they're also going to start publishing a magazine. Um, yeah, it's a magazine. They're usually 20, 30 pages. They're stapled. So yeah, not just like a flimsy little newsletter, an actual magazine. And it was called Vimana, the mysterious flying craft from ancient India, supposedly. On the first issue, and this is the most endearing thing I've ever seen. On the cover and on the masthead here, you can see their sort of showy sort of logo. They actually misspelled Vimana as Vinama, and then they crossed out the N and put an M, but they didn't. They might have. It might just be a bad copy. It looks like they might have tried to correct the second M as well. I just think that's endearing and charming, and I love those sorts of things. And they are not shy about tooting their own horn, declaring themselves to be recognized as one of the soundest flying saucer clubs in the country. I have no idea what their criteria for soundness was, but I think the fact that they're able to get these speakers on a consistent basis throughout 1954 is pretty impressive. Now, this magazine had all kinds of reports of local sightings and encounters. Many of these are very much the kinds of sightings that are that fill the filing cabinets of organizations like NICAP and APRO and MUFON. I saw a strange light in the sky. Okay, we'll file that. But some were kind of strange. There's a screenshot here. Lawrence Cardenas, middle-aged and of Mexican descent, works at the laundry at the Dearborn Inn. He was driving down the street one day and on Rotunda Road, and he sees a a craft with a veritable colony of little men jabbering in a strange language with skull caps and bright green uniforms. It's the strangest thing. And unfortunately, that intersection now, I drove past it a while back, and it is like 8 lanes across and extremely fast, and there's really nowhere to stop and get a feeling for what that environment must have been like in 1954. But the organization has sighting reports, and they've got summaries of their speakers that they've brought in and announcements about the future. They've got poetry, loads of really kind of bad poetry in these newsletters, but you can tell they're trying to make a go of it. They're trying to turn it into not just another flying saucer newsletter that collects reports, but an organization that creates those publications, that brings speakers to the city, and that provides a forum for that got cut off on my slides. I didn't change the font size. Provides a forum for members to talk to each other. And this is one of the things that is really going to bring in the people who were concerned that something shady, something subversive might be going on with the Detroit Flying Saucer Club. Laura Marxer, or Mundo Marxer, as she was sometimes known, was the vice president in charge of discussion groups. I love this. It's not just a club that you join and get a newsletter. It's a club you join, and no matter if you're in Detroit or if you're in one of the roughly 11 billion suburbs that were growing like crazy during the 1950s, in your neighborhood, in your town, would be a flying saucer discussion group, and you would get together in people's homes, and you would talk about the flying saucers. And it's a way to get people together. It's a social thing. It's intellectual and spiritual discovery. It's not just a newsletter like you might see from some other clubs. They're trying to do multiple things. but some people were suspicious. Throughout 1954, lots of reports to the Detroit office of the FBI about the possibility that these UFO folks might be involved in subversive activities. Now, this is kind of interest. I think it's kind of interesting anyway. So, in the Freedom of Information Act file, I got one years ago on George Adamski, and I noticed that there was a huge amount of material in Adamski's FOIA release that was mostly from the Detroit bureau office, and it was really tangentially related to the Detroit Flying Saucer Club. And so that when I later when I started working on this Detroit Flying Saucer Club angle, I FOIA'd the people involved, and I got most of the same stuff with some additional stuff. And the great thing about FOIA files is that sometimes the FBI gets kind of sloppy about redacting names, and so you can find out some things about people. But also, you get not just what people send to the FBI, but what different parts of the FBI talk to each other about. Excuse me. Talk to each other about with regard to some of these things. So one example of these things is actually let me go to this slide first, just to talk about some context, which you may well know about, and that's fine. But this is the era of the Red Scare. This is the era of fear of Soviet communist subversion of American institutions, of American society, of American culture. The Cold War was not just geopolitical. It was ideological and cultural as well. So when people say things that could be construed as not entirely supportive and optimistic about the United States, those people could run the risk of being thought of as subversive, as trying to undermine American unity and American morale. In the big picture, we've all heard of things like the Hollywood blacklists and McCarthy's hearings in Congress and the House Un-American Activities Committee and Alger Hiss and all of that. We know all that. Those are sort of the McCarran Act requiring federal employees to take a loyalty oath and forbade them from belonging to certain subversive organizations like the ACLU or the NAACP or organizations like that. Those are the things that any good history book will tell you. But when we look at an organization like the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, we look at these records, what we see is that this fear of subversion went a little deeper. It was very much at the street and neighborhood level. So, for example, in May of 1954, an assistant city editor at the Detroit Free Press contacted an FBI agent. And he had concerns, and he said they were from a source. The source was redacted, but context clues tell me it was the aviation editor of the Free Press. This source had concerns that flying saucer devotees in Detroit, that their approach was very strange. Speakers, the source said, started out by saying things, quote, to the effect that we're all Americans, but ... This source reported that most of the flying saucer speakers and the people speaking at Detroit Flying Saucer Club meetings called for a reduction in nuclear armaments. that they warned that, quote, we are about to blow ourselves up with hydrogen bombs, and that we should be friends and neighbors and follow what this informant called the general party line, with my little air quotes. The agent informed this editor that they'd have somebody contact them soon, but it kind of, the impression is that the FBI was not too awfully worried about the flying saucer people, but informants, concerned citizens kept calling. July 1954, Charles Gent, who's a FBI special agent, gets a call from a guy named Bud Goodman, who had visited one of the meetings of the Flying Saucer group. I'm sorry, excuse me for that cough. And he was very concerned that he thought that at first they were just trying to rip people off, that financial gain was their motive. But the more he listened to these flying saucer people, the more he believed that, quote, believers were using the flying saucer scare to issue political propaganda and also bring in a pseudo-religious angle. They are definitely against atomic warfare or against the use of atomic bombs by this country. So what makes this organization subversive? Well, in the eyes of FBI informant Bud Goodman, being opposed to nukes makes them deeply suspicious. Wanting to bring in a pseudo-religious angle makes them suspicious. He talks about political propaganda, and he's very concerned that their presentations and activities might attract people into a sort of the web of saucer belief. As an example, he told the FBI that the Detroit Flying Saucer Club was sponsoring a screening of The Day the Earth Stood Still, which, if you've seen that film, it's very similar. The overall message very similar to what a lot of contactees were talking about. Lots of worries about nuclear war and things like that. So the FBI actually will send an agent to that screening. There's other people who didn't just inform and didn't just have concerns. You had a couple of women in Detroit also who filed actual formal complaints against the Detroit Flying Saucer Club. And what's great about formal complaints is that they have names attached to them. They're not confidential informants. These are people who are going on the record saying they have an issue. One of these women was named Louise Mooney. Mooney worked at a Detroit bookstore and was interested in flying saucers. And Henry Madday, the guy who ran the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, is a frequent customer. He invited Mooney to a meeting where they were going to be getting the Detroit Flying Saucer Club going. She went to the meeting and said that she received a leaflet which made her believe, quote, the organization may have a communist aim, and believed that she should talk to the FBI. She enthusiastically told agents that she was willing to continue going to meetings and report back to the Bureau. So not just, hey, something's going on here, you should check it out, but hey, something's going on here, and I volunteer to keep an eye on these weirdos and tell you what's going on. There's another woman, a friend of Mooney's, named Jean Myris. Jean Myris was sort of got into the subject through her husband, who was interested in it, but she was also friends with Mooney. She believed that when she went to a meeting, they asked everybody to fill out a card with their name and address, and she felt that this very act of having to give her name and address was subversive, in her words. But Louise Mooney said, no, they might be communist, but this woman, Jean Myris, had some more specific concerns about the DFSC. She said, quote, At the meeting, someone said they were glad to see so many people come out with open minds and virgin minds. And also, it was said that if they were ready to accept flying saucers, then they were ready for bigger things. She said they also said that they wanted to train people to go to schools and little towns and inform the people about things they should know. They wanted people to donate money to put books in schools, libraries, and hospitals, etc. And like Louise Mooney, Jean Myris was willing to keep attending these meetings in order to provide the FBI with more information. Now, I've got to say that if Myris's report of what was said is correct, that what they said about if you're ready to accept flying saucers, then you're ready for bigger things. I'm left wondering what those bigger things are. Given the people involved and their interests in spiritualism and religious topics, Madej had a long history of that. So did the Reeves. So did Laura Marxer. I suspect that some kind of new age, new thought sort of philosophy is probably the bigger things that are being discussed or talked about. That is my sort of assumption of what they were probably talking about. But if I'm going in already sort of conditioned to think that there might be some kind of subversive angle here, this sounds like we are using flying saucers to sucker people into something much bigger. And my first thought, if I were a woman in 1954, would probably be communism, actually. So we've got this concern about these ideas. We've got this concern about showing this film, The Day the Earth Stood Still. An FBI agent did go to the film screening, and George Adamski, they brought him in to introduce the film and to lead a question and answer session later. The FBI agent, a guy named Thomas Robinson, estimated there were about 250 people there to view the film, which is pretty fun. But the FBI agent, Agent Robinson, his conclusion. His conclusion was that. Sorry, we'll go back to that one. His conclusion was, quote, "No statements were made concerning the A-bomb or hydrogen bombs, nor was any indication given that a pacifist movement was or is to be instituted." End quote. The agent recommended that the Bureau close the matter. And this was not the first time that the Bureau had said, there's nothing to see here. Earlier in 1954, there were people who said no statements were made about the H-bomb. That's the one I just shared with you. It's recommended that this matter be placed in a closed status. So there were numerous times when different agents in the Detroit field office listened to people's concerns, went to meetings, went to this film screening, and said, there's nothing here. What are here are people talking about flying saucers, and that's not something that the FBI is necessarily interested in at this point. The home study groups were thought to be something that were also potentially subversive, or could be like a fifth column of communists. And there's one guy named Vern Willard. And Vern Willard, he was an enthusiastic informant. He was super enthusiastic. Here we can see a listing of the groups, suburban groups, discussion groups for the Detroit Flying Saucer Club. He's down there in Farmington. Vern Willard. How do I know Vern Willard was going to be an informant? Well, okay, I'll be fair. One time they didn't, on one of his letters to the FBI, they didn't redact his name. So that was kind of a giveaway. But I'd already figured it out because I'm a genius. Not because I'm a genius, but because on one of his letters, they blocked out his name, but they didn't block out his address. And it was the same as the address of this Vern Willard guy who was on that list of Detroit Flying Saucer discussion groups. So I put two and two together and came up with that. So Vern Willard gets involved with the discussion groups, and he gets involved with them wanting to be an informant from the very beginning. His wife was kind of interested in it. He really wasn't interested in flying saucers, but he goes in with the goal of finding out this information for the FBI. And his first letter to the FBI, I love this. He says, "I will keep sending you information until you tell me to stop." So sort of basically telling the FBI, look, I'm sending you all this stuff about these people, whether you want it or not. You're going to have to to make me stop. But some of the things he reported from his conversations with Flying Saucer Club officials struck him as troublesome. Laura Marxer told him once, quote, "The object of the group meetings are to indoctrinate enough people to receive flying saucers and to receive space people." Willard was very concerned about that. This idea that the idea isn't just to talk about flying saucers, but it's to condition people to receive the truth of what's going on. And he talks about, and this is a letter he wrote to the office in October of '54. He said that the conversation, quote, boiled down to three things: religion, science, and double talk. And he doesn't really describe or define what the double talk is. He says, "The double talk is what got me. I don't know anything more than I read in the newspapers and hear on the radio and television about subversives, but I felt, and at times I was sure, the talk was subversive. You had to read in between the lines and catch the part aimed in your direction. I don't like these particular people, and they're not the kind we'd have for friends. The talk was fantastic, as I expected it to be. I am firmly convinced after listening to them that there is no such thing as a flying saucer. If the groups that are formed, and there are supposed to be 20 of them, they carry on in this light that they did at my house, what a beautiful setup they have for spreading their gospel." End quote. This is what's great about this is he, at least for me, or maybe not great, actually kind of troubling, but what's telling about it is he acknowledges he can't point to any particular thing that they're talking about that is subversive. He says it just feels subversive, and you read between the lines, and all I know is what I read in the papers and hear on the radio. But these folks are up to something. He said again, quote, "I will repeat, I think this is a subversive group. I don't know if they carry on with me or not. I'm not going to push it, but just wait and see if anything else happens. I know this. As an individual, I can be ruined in my community by even being associated with flying saucers. But where my country is concerned, my feelings are secondary." And then he closes in all caps, "I can't prove this group is subversive." It's so amazing because he is so convinced, and these letters go on for pages and pages and pages. He is convinced these folks are up to something, but he can't put his finger on why he thinks that, and he can't put his finger on what they're up to, except they seem kind of negative about nuclear war, and they talk about religious kind of stuff a lot. He doesn't think that's appropriate. But again, we don't have any particular document that I've found so far where the FBI said, stop doing this. They're happy to keep getting these reports. They don't do a lot with them, but they do keep accepting the reports. So what did the FBI do with all of this? Not a lot. Not a lot. In the end, J. Edgar Hoover would send a message to the Detroit office of the FBI saying, "Why don't you bundle all this stuff up and send it to the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And this was sort of reading between the lines. The gist is, please get back to solving bank robberies and kidnappings and murders and tax evasion and all the things that are really big problems for the Bureau. So what happens to the Detroit Flying Saucer Club? The FBI isn't interested in following up. Did the Detroit Flying Saucer Club know that the FBI was looking into them? I think some of them probably had a good idea. One of the informants talks about a meeting where Henry Madej discussed the fact that, people have asked, are there fellow travelers or, communists in the organization? And he said, there could be. I have no idea. I'm not a communist, but I don't know what every single person believes. But he makes it clear, if somebody's, a dangerous anti-government subversive, they don't really want anything to do with that. Because in the end, these are not radical folks. These are not wild-eyed, people on any sort of political fringe. These are what many would consider to be solid citizens, solid middle-class, upstanding citizens of the 1950s. But the flying saucer talk makes them suspect, and the religious and political angles that might be involved make them suspect. In the end, it's not the FBI that would take down the Detroit Flying Saucer Club. It appears to be that they just sort of splintered and each goes their own way. And a big part of this is the question of which contactees kind of count, because they bring in Adamski, they bring in Truman Bethram, they bring in George Hunt Williamson, but then there's a contact situation in the mid-1950s that gets national attention, and not in a good way. And in Michigan, the people involved with this were a couple named Charles and Lillian Loughead. And they were involved with a woman who has gone by numerous names. Oh, shoot, this is embarrassing. That I can't remember, but you'll know her. And it'll come to me as soon as we're done here tonight. If you've read the book or heard of the book, When Prophecy Fails, the woman who was behind these channelings about an end of the world in December 1954. She had all these people come to her house in suburban Chicago, and then nothing happens. And the sociologists who infiltrated this group and talked about it and wrote about it, from this study, they coined the phrase cognitive dissonance to sort of describe what happens when something you firmly believe is completely at odds with all the evidence of your eyes and ears and your brain's ability or inability to cope with that. This was a major story in Michigan, as well as around the country. But in Michigan, Charles Loughead, he was a medical doctor, and he was a medical doctor at the hospital at Michigan State University at the time. And he recruited students into his flying saucer study group and shared these channeled messages and things like that. And he lost his job over it. And that was sort of criticized as they're targeting him for his UFO beliefs. But honestly, it was mostly because students complained to the administration that this Dorothy Martin, thank you, Pete, Dorothy Martin. I could not think of her name. Pete in the comments saves me with Dorothy Martin. But students complained that Loughead was basically proselytizing on school time. And they're like, somebody do something about this guy. He's not teaching his classes. He's not dealing with his patients. He's not doing anything he's supposed to. So this was sort of an embarrassing black eye for people in the mid-1950s who thought that channeled messages were reliable. And there was a difference of opinion in the Detroit Flying Saucer Club over whether these channeled messages were authentic, or if channeling in itself was authentic, or if we should only rely on physical contacts. And that dispute, and according to some FBI informants, disputes over money management within the club led the group to split up, and it sort of just goes away. But so they splinter, and the founders generally fade into obscurity. Henry Madej will be active in sort of spiritualist circles in Detroit for the rest of his life, but he stays away from the UFO stuff from what I've seen. Helen and Bryant Reeve go on a cross country tour and down to Mexico, meeting basically every major contactee and writing a book about it, Flying Saucer Pilgrimage. And then after that, they sort of fade away as well. But one of these folks stays around, and that is Laura Mundo. She goes back to being Laura Mundo after divorcing her husband Otto Marxer. Laura Mundo was strange. She established not strange. She was kind of strange actually. She established the Interplanetary Study Group in Dearborn, Michigan. That would go until her death in the late 1980s. I think she died in 1987, 1988 or so. She had an odd relationship with Adamski. The bit from a FBI informant says she stated that Adamski in California, as far as she was concerned, was her god. Admitting all his earthly faults, he was still tops. She had this very close relationship with him, and eventually she would also refer to him as the devil, or as Satan, but not Satan in a bad way, Satan in an enlightened way, because Lucifer was simply enlightened. But still, I can't imagine that Adamski was thrilled to be called Lucifer. I don't think she actually called him that until after he was dead, though. I was going to say my favorite. That's a weird thing to say. An interesting thing about Mundo's relationship with Adamski is that several times she wrote about how he would grope her or try to kiss her, and basically engage in behavior that today we call inappropriate, and was inappropriate then, but not as frowned upon. And she said she didn't criticize him for this because he only did it in front of other people as a way to test her loyalty to him. That is not healthy. I just don't believe that's a healthy relationship. She said, when we were alone, he didn't try anything, but in public, he'd grope me and then almost dare me to correct him, and I didn't out of loyalty. It's very strange, very strange, I think. So she also gets involved in politics. She has a whole series of newsletters in the 70s that aren't related to flying saucers at all. There's a lot of anti-Vietnam War stuff. She gets involved in talking about race relations. Not sure an elderly white woman from the suburbs is the best person to write an open letter to the militant black man in 1968, but she did, and she sounded very suburban white person by explaining that African Americans should be patient. I don't think the militant black community gave that much credence if they read it at all. But she was an interesting person. I got from somebody who said I believe them, said they were her great niece or something like that, a sort of pseudonymous fictionalized memoir that she wrote. But it's very sort of clumsily typed, and it hurts my eyes to read. So I'm slowly making my way through that. So, what does any of this matter? If it does matter, and I'm not sure it does. I think it does, but it matters on some scale. I think one thing that's important here is that I think it's important to pay attention to Detroit. It doesn't get a lot of attention in the UFO history circles. Everything seems to be contactees in California, large organizations like NICAP and APRO. Those are the things that get the focus. Detroit, one of the largest cities in the country, one of the most prosperous cities in the country at the time, able to draw 4,000 people to see George Adamski in 1954. There's a story here. There's a bigger story, and I'm still working on this. I for some reason I think the Detroit Flying Saucer Club is going to end up being my life's work, which I don't know. That's kind of depressing, but it's fun stuff. But it's important to pay attention to it. It's not one of the angles that tends to get a lot of attention. And this breakup of the Detroit Flying Saucer Club also provides some insight into the split within the contactee realm during the 1950s. This channeling versus physical contact thing was very pronounced, and some of those trends would continue. Physical contactees would sort of fade into the background, but man, if you go out there on the internet, there are still people out there who are claiming to channel Ashtar, just like George Van Tassel did way back in the day. So I think the sort of channeling type of contactees won, because honestly, it's a lot easier to avoid having to prove anything. If you say the guy in the silver jumpsuit took me on a spaceship and we went to Venus, there's no proof you can give. If somebody has a channeled message, there's no proof they can give. But at the same time, it's sort of beyond proof. It's more of an article of faith at that point, rather than, oh, there's a physical thing that I did. But I photos don't work of these flying saucers and whatever other excuses contactees had. And I think, and I don't have a bullet point for this, I don't think I do. No, I don't. I think it's very interesting to see how people, regular people, not flying saucer people, responded to this. They responded by being interested, but also being worried that something was wrong, something was incorrect, something was not right, something was subversive about these groups. And their instinct was to go to the FBI. And it's not just in Detroit. If you look through FOIA records from the 1950s, there's my favorite one is some guy writes to J. Edgar Hoover, not to his local FBI office, not to the FBI in general, writes out a letter. Dear Director Hoover, have you heard about Truman Bethram? Do you know anything about him? Can he be trusted? And J. Edgar Hoover writes back, the Federal Bureau of Investigation does not comment on individual American citizens. Thank you for your time. Signed, J. Edgar Hoover. This is a little window, a little lens through which we can look at the 1950s and see how fearful people were about subversion, about political difference extending beyond the boundaries of what was considered appropriately American. And one of the things, probably the thing I like about this whole story the most is this is an example of a UFO thing that I can bring into class when we talk about the 1950s, and I can talk to students about this, and it's like, okay, we talk about paranoia, we talk about people being fearful of communist subversion. Here we go, right down the road, an hour down the road, people were writing to the FBI because these flying saucer people didn't like the idea of nuclear war. It's a different world, and I think it's a window into America at the time, and we can always find ways that the past can be mapped onto the present with different attitudes and things like that. But the Detroit Flying Saucer Club, I can't remember why I started looking at these folks, but one of my very favorite things. Thank you so much. Love to answer any questions or anything that you guys have.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Having already listened to your past Saucer Life episodes, that obviously is where, at least where publicly I know that you had gotten into this, it is just a wealth rabbit hole
Yeah.
of interesting paths to go down. Um, you probably already saw fellow researcher and writer Jack Brewer
Yes.
commenting the Cold War era FOIA records indeed tell us a lot about circumstances today, in his humble opinion. I certainly think so, and I think given the times we live in, um, there is the potential for uh, a fearfulness amongst people. I mean, I don't think it would manifest obviously in the same way because flying saucers became UFOs, became UAP, and it's we are in the midst of this new kind of media campaign that's openly saying that it's rebranding itself to destigmatize
Yeah.
the subject, and it's hard. It would be harder to see it as quote unquote subversive or anti-American unless you were, I guess, espousing that it's all Chinese or it's all our own government. But there's been plenty of that already before. One of our audience members did have a specific question. Do you think the experience of the Detroit Saucer Club are representative of other clubs that were around the U.S. at the same time?
To a degree. And that's one of the things that I want to sort of look at going forward is seeing what I can find about some other clubs. I know there were some others here in Michigan that did similar things on a smaller scale. Because they were smaller cities for the most part, but I haven't come across a club that had the extensive project of sort of dozens of in-home discussion groups and study groups. That's something that I've not seen a lot of in other places. I think the closest you have to that are like local clubs that are affiliated with NICAP or MUFON or APRO at the state level or at like sort of the large metropolitan level. I think one of the things about these smaller flying saucer organizations is that they didn't last long. Like the Detroit Flying Saucer Club goes from bringing 4,000 people to see George Adamski to not even existing 18 months later. So it's these things are just little blips here and there, and it's so one of the things that's kind of confusing sometimes is a lot of these clubs give themselves incredibly grandiose names like International Flying Saucer Coalition or something, and you find it's like some 16-year-old kid in his bedroom and his friends, putting out a newsletter that did 2 issues and like, oh, I thought that was something huge, and no, it's just something like I would have done when I was a kid. But yeah, I am very interested to see what other organizations might have been doing stuff like this. So far, I haven't found anything on this scale.
I can recommend two books that come to mind that are academic works of a sort, and that is Matthew Bowman's "The Abduction of Betty and Barney Hill: Alien Encounter, Civil Rights, and the New Age in America," which is of course about the Betty and Barney Hill case, and it goes into such much greater detail about their life and the context and these kinds of like community meetings and groups and get-togethers. They, not a formal group like the Saucer Club, but then also Greg Agigian, his book on after the flying saucers came, I think is the title, which goes into great detail on a global scale of how these, and it really kind of reminds me of the science fiction fandom clubs and how that kind of almost transmuted into this kind of thing. Let's see. Of course, and thank you to our other audience members who have been posting in the chat. Stan, great to see you there. Lots of context. Stan, having lived through some of these eras of the past before my time, and commenting on the connection to UFO sightings and nuclear missile and nuclear powered military vessels and that sort of thing. And thank you, Jack, for the compliment on this presentation. I really always enjoy hearing Aaron's perspective. He always makes me laugh on his podcast. And let's see, what was Pete? Pete says, considering the possible historical cultural value of the materials like magazine groups like DFCS produce, do you know if these are collected anywhere? Or are they being digitized to preserve? Maybe.
Yes. I know that the issues, I think there's 5 issues of Vimana from the club that were produced, and those have been scanned and are up at Archives for the Unexplained, which afu.su. And you can get to their website that way, I think. Also, John Tenney. John Tenney has done a good job of sort of collecting these things, and I think some of the Vimana stuff he's selling they're very affordable, sort of at cost almost, through Amazon, sort of on a print on demand collection of the newsletters as well. So yeah, that stuff is being saved, which is great. If it wasn't, I mean, I think I first found out about this group because I downloaded a bunch of newsletters from AFU's website, and this was one of them. So I was, fodder for an episode, and then it sort of leads me down this whole rabbit hole.
And speaking of rabbit holes, one of the things that you did cover in a past podcast that, I mean, is a whole other trail. You mentioned, I don't know how much to go into this, but Laura Mundo claiming that a very famous contactee was present at these meetings, but was dressed as a woman, and all the other stories associated with this person, this space person, space brother, and and them interacting with a presumed homosexual who was having trouble in his heterosexual marriage. This really reminds me of people who've explored the gender and sexuality issues surrounding certain contactees and other people in the field at the time, like Gray Barker, who was, I believe, the publisher of so many of these items. Just that it's a fascinating potential line of inquiry, and I know that there's some queer and gay writers in the field of the paranormal who have been exploring some of this in a way that is fascinating.
Yeah, it's that story about Orthon, Adamski's Orthon, coming to these meetings dressed as a woman and then having an affair with this supposedly gay man who was married to another woman, but who cured him, in massive sarcasm quotes, cured him of his homosexuality, right? So you've got that sort of angle hanging over it. It's completely strange, and one of the things that makes it strange is that Mundo writes about it so confusingly that you can't really tell what's going on. Sometimes you usually need a flow chart to figure out because she's not giving a lot of names out. She's protecting people's identities. So there's a whole lot of pronouns that are out there. Like, so who's this he and who's that she and who is going where with whom? But it's fascinating. And your mention of Gray Barker reminds me, this spring, a new biography of Barker is coming out by a guy named Gabriel McKee, who's a librarian at NYU. And I've read an advanced copy, and it is outstanding. It is the comprehensive biography of Barker and sort of study of his publishing that I've been really hoping somebody would do forever. So it's if you're into Gray Barker and the history of ufology, it's a great book. He's done a fantastic job.
I'm so excited to hear that. Thank you for sharing that. I had not heard about that. Of course, folks, for in the time being, there are two documentaries out there about Gray Barker. One of them extremely hard to find, black and white. That the name eludes me, but I've
Whispers from Space.
Whispers from Space, which I very much enjoy, especially because of its uh, origins from a 90s zine scene publisher. Um, and then there's, of course, Shades of Gray, which is also really, really good. Um, well, folks can go to Aaron's website, saucerlife.com. I highly recommend the wonderful podcast there. Like I say, you can do it since 2017. And again, thanks for the kudos from some of our viewers. Really appreciate
Thank you.
the support and enthusiasm, and everybody for tuning in. And well, let's see you again soon. If you can hang out a little, I'll talk to you on the other side after we end this session. And again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Really appreciate the audience participation. And this next month, probably going to be Wednesday, March 26th. Topic to be determined. We're going to have fellow researcher and podcaster and journalist Micah Hanks as our presenter for next month's presentation. He, of course, is the host of the long-running Micah Hanks program, as well as the subscriber-based extra episodes for the X podcast. And, of course, the founder and editor-in-chief over at the debrief.org. Always an interesting source of information. So hope you'll join us for that. And that's going to be it for tonight. And yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stan. Y'all take care and be safe.
Thank you.